All right. So thanks all for being here. My name is Leah, and many of you have probably seen me. I usually help host our webcasts for OSTA. And I'm just going to quickly go through a few things with Zoom before I turn it over to Noelle, who is our guest tonight. So just a few things if you've never used Zoom before. Everyone's automatically muted when you come into the meeting. So just remember, if you would like to ask a question or share something, to unmute yourself first. And there's where you will find the button to do that. But we ask that everyone stay muted for now, just because it really helps the audio for everyone. Sometimes background sounds come in, so that can just keep it so we can hear Noelle and all of the important things that she'll have to tell us. We would also love for everyone to turn on your video camera so we can see you. This is a nice opportunity to get to meet some colleagues and talk amongst ourselves as educators. So please, if you're able to turn on a camera on your device, we would love to see you and your face. And I don't think this will apply for this evening. We won't have any breakout groups. So I don't think any of us will need to share screens, except for Noelle. If you have a question and you're more comfortable typing it in the chat, this button at the bottom is to access the chat feature, and you can go ahead and type in the question, and I can help Noelle monitor that and bring it up if there's a good time for questions. And we will also try to leave some time at the end for questions as well. And just as another tip for those of you who are new to Zoom, if you feel like you're stuck and you can't find something like a web browser window, hit your escape button and it'll exit the full screen for you, and then you'll be able to find your web browser and whatever other applications you might need to see. And that's it for our intro. So I'm gonna let Noelle take it from here and share what she has on her screen.
Okay.
And while she's getting that set up, just so you know, Noelle is going to share her PowerPoint slides with me. So when I email all of you with your PDU certificates, I can include this presentation, and we'll also have it on our website. So if there's any links that you feel like you might be missing, you will get access to this later, so don't worry.
So good afternoon, evening, everyone. My name is Noelle Gorbett. I'm with the Oregon Department of Education. I'm the Science Assessment Specialist. I also have with me Jamie Rummage. Am I too loud, Jamie? No. Jamie Rummage is our Science Education Specialist. We work together. So we have some information to share tonight about the Oregon Science Assessment. Going here. We're going to talk about what a balanced assessment system is, the OSAS Science Assessment itself, just some updated information for this year, and the local performance assessment requirement. We'll be talking about that just a little bit. So first, we're going to talk about balanced assessment systems, and basically, we're trying to put all types of assessment in balance across our state. Summative is just one small piece of that assessment system as a whole. When we look at this image, we see rigorous content standards span the entire length of the system. So all of these assessment pieces are based on those same rigorous content standards. The graphic contains an aspirational target for our statewide approach to assessment. Within this system, formative assessment provides immediate usable feedback on student learning. Interim or benchmark assessments serve as checkpoints for longer-term student progress. And the summative assessments allow a look back at the entirety of the instructional period. They provide valuable information for planning and the next instructional year and beyond. So summative assessments are not really useful in guiding day-to-day instruction, student by student. It's really meant to be informative of the entire program as a whole. Formative assessment practices are the assessment pieces that we should be really focusing on to guide day-to-day lesson planning. And then the interim assessments help us to identify whether or not students are hitting that benchmark standard. So we have a professional development webpage on our ODE website that provide training materials around formative assessment as a process. There's a lot of misconception about formative assessment, that it is an actual instrument, that it's a set of tests or a specific test, but formative assessment is really the process that we work through with our students together. So it's not just basically having checks or quizzes, it goes beyond that, and it really gets to, you know, metacognition and having the student have ownership in their own learning. So I highly recommend looking at these formative assessment resources that are on our webpage. The formative assessment course that's listed here, the OFAS, it's a pretty big course. It's really like a full-length class that is intended to be used by a group of teachers who are working through the process and learning together. But there are pieces there that teachers can pull out and look at individually, even if they're not working through the entire course. And so I highly recommend particularly Module 2. So take a close look at that. The Right Assessment, Right Purpose is a document that Oregon Department of Education has recently developed that really speaks to assessment literacy. And so often we're using the same terms, but we have different meaning, or we're talking about things that we don't genuinely understand, or we just want some more information about assessment that has not been provided to us in our professional learning to date. So this document, it's a pretty big document, but it lays out a lot of definitions and explains a lot of things about balanced assessment systems that could be really helpful to informing how you're thinking about assessment, how you're using assessment to guide instruction, and how you're using assessment data to guide decision making, because we're often using assessment data inappropriately. So we have to think about what is the intended purpose of that specific assessment, and how are we really applying that data to the decisions that we're making, and is it appropriate? So I think rather than moving on, since we have the ability to take some questions, Leah, I think we can just take some questions right now about formative assessment or the balanced assessment system, if anybody has some.
Feel free to share it out, or you can type it into the chat.
Are you able to see the chat?
None come in yet, so.
We'll give it just a second longer before we move on to the next piece.
I'm getting feedback when you talk. I take off the headphones.
Sorry.
No. I didn't think about that.
How are we doing, Leah?
Still no questions yet.
All right, we're going to go ahead and move on. If questions come up, please write them in the chat. So we're going to talk about the 2019 OSAS Science Assessment. The science assessment is required to be given to every student in grades 5, 8, and 11. High school students may bank a passing high school assessment score in 8th if they're targeting up to a high school test, 9th or 10th grade, fulfilling the 11th grade requirement. This is a frequently asked question, so it's good that we cover it. The 2019-20 science assessment test window opens January 7th and runs through June 5th, 2020. Each district will have their own windows that they assign, but this is the entire length of the window for the state. Students will have one annual test opportunity, so just one. There are no additional opportunities for this school year. Scores will not be available to students immediately upon completion of the assessment. Students didn't receive scores last year either, so this isn't a change, but it may not be commonly known that students are not getting their scores. Test opportunities are subject to a 45-day calendar expiration period. So, and this is calendar days, not school days. So from the time the student starts the test, they have 45 calendar days to complete it before it expires. So we get the question sometimes, what is on the 5th grade test? So items on the 5th grade test cover standards 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade standards. So any of those standards could be appearing on the 5th grade test. And likewise, 8th grade covers all of the middle school standards, and high school covers all of the high school. So now we're going to look at a couple of items, and I'm going to point out just a few things about them. This is a simulation item example. This is a screenshot taken from one of our sample tests. So we highly encourage teachers to take their students onto the osasportal.org, and we will include that link so you're able to get to it easily. There are sample tests there for 5th grade, 8th grade, and 11th grade, just one sample test. And it'll take you through an abbreviated version of the test. So there are fewer items on this test than there are in the actual test. But it's just meant to give students an opportunity to engage with some of the different tools that they can use on the assessment, to see what some of the questions look like, to have an opportunity to engage in the different types of interactions that are present there. It's an opportunity for teachers to see what kinds of supports are helpful to the student. So for instance, text-to-speech is a designated support, which means an adult has to select it for the student, and text-to-speech can be selected either in TIDE, so the teacher recommends it to the district test coordinator who puts it into the system, or the school test coordinator if they're the ones making entries into TIDE, or the test administrator, the TA, can go in and also select text-to-speech for the student. But we really want to have the student try out text-to-speech before they have it assigned to them on the test, just to make sure that it is going to be helpful to them and not a distraction. Likewise, Spanish, a student can receive the test in a Spanish format, which means that they have the first item will present first in Spanish, and then there's a button at the top of the screen that allows them to switch back to English, and so they're allowed to switch back and forth between Spanish and English for each item, with the answer being saved in whichever language they're working in that moment, and carrying over to the other language. But we want to give them the opportunity to engage with it first before it's assigned to them in the test administration. We have a question.
In the chat box. So the question is that for all students or just as an accommodation?
Okay, and I think they're talking about text-to-speech. Is that for all students or just an accommodation? So it's a designated support, which means it doesn't require an IEP to assign it. So it's not an accommodation, but it does mean that an adult, usually the teacher or the parent, recommends that and is saying that that is a tool that will support the student's ability to be successful on the test. I hope that answers the question. So this particular item, I think one of the things to point out is the simulation piece. I think currently there is not a simulation on the middle school test, but there is on the 5th grade. So as a 8th grade teacher, I would still go on to the 5th grade and have students look at that simulation, just because I know for a fact that they're going to encounter some simulations, and if they've never seen one before, which they probably haven't, that would be a good practice for them to look at. Here's another frequently asked question. We can see in this item that there is a little box with a keypad that looks like it could be a calculator. This is actually a numeric entry keypad. It's not a calculator. At the top of the test screen in the upper right-hand corner, there's a button that says calculator, and that is what pulls down the calculator. This is actually, this little box in Part C provides the student an opportunity to use the screen to select the numbers or the expression or the equation to answer the question. They could also use their keypad if they're working on a device that has one to do that. I think in most devices there will be, even if it's a iPad or a Chromebook, there will be a keypad that will pop up in an iPad, and they can use the keypad on the Chromebook if they prefer, but they can click on the buttons here in this given keypad on this page to select their answer as well. So here's the link for the sample tests. So one for 5th grade, one for 8th grade, one for high school, osasportal.org. Highly recommend that you have your students engage with it. You as a teacher should engage with it so you know how questions are being presented to students. And that might also help inform your instruction so you're able to approach the way you're teaching so that students feel more comfortable with it when they see it on the test. On our ODE assessment webpage for science, we have an assessment update PowerPoint that is a little bit more detailed than what I'm sharing tonight. That should be available very soon. It's in the process of being posted to our website. It may already be there even now. There's also a scoring guide that goes along with the sample test that's posted. This is not meant to it's not a rubric. We don't recommend that you use the sample tests in any kind of evaluative way. This scoring guide is just to help teachers understand how points are awarded and how items will be scored on the back end of things. And then we also have what we call item specifications, and these are detailed information sheets that are given to item writers to help them understand what needs to be present inside each item. And so it gives guidance as to what the assessment boundaries are, what types of vocabulary are recommended for use with that particular performance expectation, what vocabulary might be considered outside of the performance expectation and beyond grade level. So I think it's a valuable piece for teachers to review as they're thinking about planning for instruction. So now we're going to talk a little bit about score reporting. We gave the first operational assessment for this test last year. So the 2018-19 assessment for science was based completely on the next generation science standards. And this was the first time we did that. And because it's the first time, we couldn't award scores automatically because we hadn't determined yet what a passing score would be. We needed to conduct, 1 year of testing to determine that. And so we held a standard setting on August 19th through 21st in Portland. 3 cut scores were recommended by the Oregon Educator panelists to help define the 4 levels of proficiency at each grade level. The next part of the process will be to take that information to the state board. We're going to be taking it to the state board on December 12th. Typically we go through more than 1 reading, and so this will be our first reading to the state board, and then we'll have an additional reading most likely in January. It could be a little bit longer depending on the board's availability and any recommendations that they might have for us at the December meeting. Currently, we're engaging with community groups and educators to discuss the impact of the cut scores. As with the change to smarter balanced assessment when we had the new math and ELA standards, this test is also more rigorous because the standards are more rigorous, and we do expect to see a significant decline in the percent proficient of students across the state. And so we want to share that information with groups that will be most greatly impacted by that and get their feedback on it and advice on how we can help better prepare teachers and families for the new assessment, the new standards, and changes, shifts in instruction. So more to come on that. So before we begin talking about the local performance assessment requirement, I'm going to open it up to any questions we have about the OSAS Science Assessment, reporting, scores, or anything of that nature.
I was wondering how you're reaching out to communities around the state to talk about the impact of the cut scores or what the cut scores need to be and who's involved in that.
Sure. We've been reaching out to affinity groups, districts, particularly with an equity focus. So we just met with Eugene 4J yesterday. We met with Grand Ronde a few weeks ago. We have a community engagement group here at ODE through our equity and diversity and inclusion team. We are reaching out to some other districts right now, trying to have additional dates. If you are currently engaging in a group that has an equity focused, is serving or a part of one of our most highly marginalized groups, please let me know and we'd be happy to arrange a date to meet with you. Any other text questions?
No, nothing's coming. Oh, wait.
Just checking the chat.
Okay. Yep, it says, I know that you are working towards cut scores and there is a process, but is there a target date to return the scores for the 2018-19? So you might just want to go through the process.
Okay, so the question has to do with a timeline for reporting scores. And so, as we said earlier, we are presenting to the board, State Board of Education, later this month, December 12th. At that time, we'll be sharing the recommended cut scores with them. Once we have their approval, then we can move forward with the reporting. It'll take just a little bit of time to get through the technical pieces of that before districts receive it. So it won't be an instantaneous push of a button, but I would expect only, a couple of weeks, a few weeks delay. It's highly unlikely that they'll approve the cut scores on the first read. They will probably have us present again in possibly January, maybe later. And so we're hoping, I think best case scenario is that these scores are available mid-February.
So the next question is, will the tests actually be released before cut scores are available? So yes.
Yes, yeah. Yes, they will. So the test window opens January 7th. Not very many students assess in January. We do realize, we meaning the entire assessment team and Oregon Department of Education realizes that there are some students, particularly at high school, who would possibly wish to assess in January, who may wish to assess without receiving their score from their their sophomore or freshman year, or they can wait a little bit to see if that score is made available. Any other questions on the assessment? Okay. So now we're going to talk about science local performance assessment requirement. So in Oregon, the local performance assessment requirement states that school districts shall administer one or more performance assessments each year to all students in grades 3 through 8 and in high school in mathematics, scientific inquiry, speaking, and writing. Performance assessments must be a standardized measure, e.g. activity, exercise, problem, or work sample scored by a common scoring instrument such as an official state scoring guide or another scoring guide adopted by the district. So it's the district's choice what they use as long as it's a standardized measure. And it's embedded in the school curriculum and evaluates the application of the students' knowledge and skills. Typically, work samples are used, or another assessment of the district's choice. Districts have substantial flexibility when it comes to planning the performance assessments that are used to fulfill the requirement. Currently, science, inquiry, and engineering local performance assessment resources can be found on the ODE Science Assessment webpage. These resources have been there for quite a while, since prior to the adoption of NGSS. And while they are not reflective of the entire three-dimensionality of NGSS, they are very strong in the inquiry and engineering component that is still part of NGSS. So those can still be used. However, we are working on updated resource materials and have been for a little while, but it is taking much longer than we anticipated. We are working with a new scoring rubric. It's three-dimensional, it's pretty high level, and so we're trying to think about all the ways that we can make that easier for teachers to use. We do want to pilot this rubric before we take it to the state board for approval. And to do that, we need a bank of tasks that can be utilized with it. And so we are currently developing tasks. We have a small amount that we've created. We're also looking outside of our state to see if there are any that fulfill our criteria. But because I think there are many groups that are working on this same item task development at this time, several states, some other outside groups, and we're not all in agreement about what needs to be present in those tasks. So we're kind of all navigating, and I mean we, like the larger we across the country, we're navigating through this task development problem right now, and we just don't have the robust amount of material to pull from right now to be able to post it and just start running with a pilot. So we're having to do a lot of our own in-state development. And this last fall, we were wanting to put together a group of teachers to help develop some of these tasks. And we did not have a successful recruitment. It was the number of teachers that were applying to participate in the project was too small. And so we are at the state level rethinking how we are approaching this development to speed it up, to improve it, and we just ask for your patience as we work through this together. In the meantime, we do have some resources for teachers to use, because we know that these local performance assessment pieces are used beyond just the requirement, and many teachers use them to help guide how they're assessing students in the classroom, particularly benchmark assessment. And so here are some resources that you can look at to help you look through tasks that are posted online by other groups to evaluate them for their quality and alignment, as well as there are actually a couple of links listed here. There's one for Kentucky. They've done some task work for development. I think their task bank is varies. The materials that are there, some are okay and some are not as good. So it's kind of looking through those to find the pieces that will suit your needs, and then using the Achieve pre-screener and screening tools to really help you identify the attributes that are there and what you want to have appear on your assessments in your classroom. So I'm going to take some questions about local performance assessment right now.
I see one in the chat. Does an engineering sample count as one for scientific inquiry?
I'm sorry, say that again, Leah.
Does an engineering sample count as one for scientific inquiry? So I think they're wondering if an engineering task would meet the scientific inquiry requirement for the...
Yes, for local performance assessment.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and that was a policy that was established by my predecessor, and so we're honoring that. Any other questions? Okay.
Oh, one just came in.
Oh, okay.
Wondering what exactly is the expectation of districts around giving LPAs and what to do with the scores?
Okay. So it is a requirement under our OARs. And this link will take you to that requirement so that you can read it more closely if you'd like. It is a requirement, so once per year. The scores stay with your district, and it's really intended to be used as a tool for evaluating programs across the district. So if your district selects the standardized measure that focuses on potentially an area where you feel that your instruction maybe hasn't been as strong in years past, then they can look at what's working, what's not working across the district. Maybe there's one school or one teacher or another who's using a different way of a different method for instructing around that one piece. It would help you identify those strengths to be able to ask further questions about, if it's working here, why is it working here? Let's, change our instruction accordingly. So it's really meant to be used for district purposes. It's that data is not handed over to the state, so we don't see it. Anything else? Okay.
There's another part to that, actually.
Oh.
And is there an expectation for graduation requirements that gets recorded, like ELA?
Oh, okay. That's a good question. There was a question about essential skills and science and whether this is a graduation requirement. No, as a matter of fact, although this information about local performance assessment is found in our essential skills manual, it is not an essential skill that students need to demonstrate for graduation. So unlike math and ELA, students do not need to demonstrate proficiency in science before graduating. Good question. Anything else? Okay. So I'm just going to go over a few frequently asked questions that we received here at ODE. So the first question, do all students need headphones for the OSAS science test? No, we don't have any audio dependent items. So students don't need to have headphones for that purpose. It used to be in years past, at the beginning of the assessment, there would be a video and audio check where the student would hear a little jingle and they would see a little graphic video play at that point in time. That has been retired. We now have a video only check, so it's no longer audio and video combined. For students who have text-to-speech selected on their assessment, they will need headphones and they will receive a second check on the beginning of their test to make sure that they can hear the audio that's provided. If they are taking the test in Spanish, they will have a third check that asks them to check the text-to-speech audio in Spanish. So first they'll see the video, then they'll hear the audio in English, and then they'll hear the audio in Spanish. Second FAQ question, can scratch paper be saved for the next test session? So before OSAS, when we had our old OAKS test, notes in the test administration manual, it said that notes should be shredded. Because of the cluster format within the OSAS Science Assessment. We felt that it would be valuable for students to be able to retain their notes so that if they're working through a task when they're asked to end their session by the test administrator, they can still have those notes for the next time they go into their next session. So those notes need to be collected by the test administrator and securely stored between OSAS Science Assessment test sessions. And then the last question I have here on the FAQ, will a student be able to continue working through a task after they have paused the test for more than 20 minutes? Yes. All items that they previously finished, as in they answered everything on the screen, they will not have access to those items. Those will be locked. But for the items that they're still working on, like if they're in the middle of a cluster task and they're halfway through the item and they've left some things unanswered, they're going to be able to go back into that item and continue working on it when they open their next test session. So in that way, they may have some answers from their previous session that will be retained. And so they'll be allowed to go back into that task item that was in progress. So now I'm just going to offer some time for any additional questions you have about the material we presented or anything that you're curious about that we haven't presented. And if we can give you an answer tonight, we will. And if not, I can get your contact information and we'll get the answer to you as soon as we can. And don't go away if you don't have a question. I do have some more information to share with you about some upcoming events. Anything in the chat?
Will districts and schools be notified about the scores when they're available from last year?
Yes.
This is a great opportunity to talk about the listserv.
Yes. So a couple things. So yes, districts and schools will be notified as soon as those scores are made available. And I believe they'll receive that communication from our accountability team. We'll also put it on the district test coordinator listserv weekly newsletter, as well as our science newsletter listserv. We'll be sending it out there as well. At the end of this presentation, I have the link to sign up for our science newsletter listserv. We hope if you're not on it already that you'll sign up tonight because we do send out regular newsletters with valuable information about what's going on here at ODE, what's going on around the state. All right, if there are no questions, I'm going to move on to some announcements. If you haven't seen it already, we do have some more item development coming up for the OSAS Science Assessment. January 14th through 15th, we'll be conducting a content review meeting. During this content review, we look at potential science items that have been written either by us or by another state. And we review those to make sure that they're in alignment with the next generation science standards, that they are appropriate for the grade level, that they follow all of the criteria that we've outlined in our test plan in terms of the structure of the items, that everything in it works correctly and all the scientific information is correct. So if that sounds interesting and exciting to you, we hope that you'll fill out an application for that. Most teachers that attend these content review meetings at the end will say that's one of the best professional learning opportunities I've ever had, just in learning about assessment, item development, the NGSS standards, etc.
We do have a question that came in,
Question.
but it's says, would the ACT be an example of an LPA?
Oh, that's a really good question.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Would the ACT be a good example of a local performance assessment?
I don't think that would be probably the proper use for ACT.
Yeah, I'm not going to say yes or no. I'm going to ask that the district think about what information they're gathering from the results of the ACT and how they intend to use it, and ask whether or not they feel it fulfills the criteria of it's definitely a standardized measure. So just thinking about, is this the best tool that you can use to help you understand what's going on with science teaching and learning in your district? January 22nd and 23rd, we have a bias and sensitivity meeting. And really this is, we reviewing the same items that we do in the content meeting, but we're really looking at it through a lens of fairness, and making sure that all of the items are free of bias and don't contain anything that would be insensitive towards any student or group of students. Lunch is provided at all of our meetings. Panelists will either be compensated for their time if they're not on contract, or receive substitute reimbursement as applicable. Travel reimbursement is available, and we do provide hotel for panelists who are traveling from further than 70 miles away from Salem. And the application deadline is just around the corner, December 16th.
Noelle, if you email this to me, I'll also include it in our newsletter that's going to go out soon.
Thank you, Leah. Okay, any questions about item development or being a part of our test development? So Jamie and I are here to help you, not only with the assessment piece, but also with the instructional piece. We hope that you'll reach out to us when you have questions about the Next Generation Science Standards, also known as the 2014 Oregon Science Standards. If you have a need for professional learning in your area and want to have your district or ESD reach out to us to arrange that, we're happy to try to get that rolling. We do want you to sign up for our listserv, and you can reach out to us anytime.
Thank you so much, Noelle. I'm just going to post a link to our exit survey, just a reminder for folks who are wanting to get a certificate for a PDU for attending. Please make sure you fill this out, and that's how I get it to you. There's the link there.
I'm going to hand you back the share.
And also just a heads up, our next webcast is going to be January 16th, and we're going to welcome C. Green. She joined us last year, and she's going to be talking about engineering from an Indigenous perspective. So thinking about the past, present, and future of engineering. And I will post a link to register for that if you're available. She's an amazing presenter. I think it's going to be really great. So hopefully you can join us for that too. And thanks everyone for being here in the evening, and you're all so dedicated, so we appreciate you.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you, Leah. Thank you, OSTA. I appreciate you having us.
Yeah, it's great to be able to work together to try to get information out to everyone.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, well, I'll post the link one more time. Please grab that. And then if anyone has any other questions, we can hang out for a few minutes. If folks feel like they got the information they needed, have a great evening.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Maggie, for being here. I think you have your Q&A down, Noelle. Or sorry, your FAQ, not your Q&A, your FAQ.
Yeah, I knew what you meant. Okay.
It's the end of the day.
Thank you, Roxanne.
All right, well, I think if there's no other questions, we'll go ahead and close it out. Thank you, and
Leah.
Jamie, thank you too so much for being here.
Everybody have a great night.
Oh, I have one question I'll answer really quickly from Mark, asking about, yes, we are going to share the PowerPoint. We are also going to share the recording. He couldn't come in till a little late. So yes, you will get another chance to see the information. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.